Hi everyone, and welcome to I Might Be Wrong. My name is Travis Sepala, and this is my show. Before we get started today, I just want to ask all of you to take a second of your time to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're getting it via audio podcast, then leave a review, 5-star review. Subscribe to it wherever you do all of these things. All of these things really help this message reach more people, and it only really takes a moment of your time. Also, if you'd like to support I Might Be Wrong financially, so that I can keep building this, you will find all the necessary links in the description. One quick note, this episode had a pretty large audio hiccup at the start, so the first few seconds were cut off, and that's why it jumps off a bit fast, but trust me, it's worth it. All right, let's get with it. So, jumping into the topic, what I would first like to address is that, to me, it's very obvious that it's highly influenced by a statement that we find within Christianity that says that we as Christians are in this world, but we're not of this world. And this is a reflection of Jesus' high priestly prayer where he prays for his disciples, he prays for the believers, and he's saying that they are not of this world just as I am not of this world. And this thought pattern of being in this world but not of this world, there's nothing wrong with this if it's understood in the sense that as a believer, we find our existence in this world. We eat, we move, we breathe, we're engaged in our society, and at the same time we understand that this is not our home. But that's not how it gets interpreted. It's much more the case of, hey, we're here, but we're not supposed to have anything to do with it and separate from it entirely. And that has happened, especially in the United States of America, where the Christian church at large has almost cloistered itself off into these little groups. And then it wakes up one day and somebody sends their second grader to school and they come home and they're asking about, what furries are, or they're telling them about the fact that they have classmates in second grade who are telling them that they're dealing with issues with, like, the fact that they're non-binary, and they're talking to your children at a very young age about very hypersexualized topics. And when you want to address this with the leadership or something like that, what ends up happening is you're seen as the one who has a problem, which seems rather insane. Or we could look at the fact that there literally wasn't not that long ago, there were people competing in the Olympics who were biologically men against people who were biologically women and doing damage to them. And if you want to kind of put your hand up and say, well, that doesn't seem right, you're seen as a hateful person. And it's not just going on. I just wanted to point out that it could happen at the Olympic level, but it's happening in high schools across the country. It's happening in colleges across the country. You literally have girls' teams that are boycotting playing against other teams because they realize if they play against that team, they're going to be competing against people who are biologically male. And instead of people standing up and saying, oh yeah, that's a wonderful thing, let's take care of you, these girls are seen as being hateful. Now, the reason I find this fascinating, and there's a lot of reasons, but one of the things that I was thinking about recently is I think about the fact that, I'm 46 years old. 20 years ago, 2005, could I have ever imagined a world where something like this would go on? Where second graders would come home and talk about the fact that there's literally people coming to school in costumes pretending to be something that they're not, and when you want to try to deal with that kind of a behavior or that kind of a problem, you're seen as the problem as a parent. Or could I ever imagine at a high school level girls going to compete against other girls and there's literally other boys pretending to be girls going against them, and in a lot of cases absolutely dominating them. And if you want to point your finger at that and simply say, hey, that doesn't seem right, you're seen as some type of a hateful bigot. The answer is, of course, no, I could never imagine this. It's impossible for me to just go back then and think, oh yeah, would that have been possible? The reality is it wouldn't have been possible. And one of the things I found myself asking about a lot lately is, how does something like this happen? And it's not just something that I've asked myself. I've had conversations with other people about this very thing. How does something like this happen? Because it's not the type of thing that just happens overnight. It's kind of like, for instance, like when a couple gets divorced, a married couple gets divorced. That's not the type of thing that, they wake up one day after years and years of happy marriage where they love each other and everything's great, and that's Monday, and then Tuesday they wake up and say, hey, we don't like each other anymore. We're going to get divorced. No, something like that happens over time. There's a separation, a growth over time. It's very incremental in nature. It almost happens while people are not paying attention, while they're not even having conversations any longer. And I think this isn't really that much different. Changes like this, because of just how drastic they are and how much different they are, they're not the type of thing that happens over time. And the fact of the matter is they can only happen if there's a certain level of apathy within the culture and the leadership at large. And I think that this apathy can be explained quite simply by the statement that the Christian church has thought of itself as being in the world, but not of the world. And they've been doing this for quite some time. So they can completely wrap themselves up in their tight little communities, go into these protective shells, not be involved in their schools, not get involved in anything else. The only thing really being a Christian is now becomes about, my church and my people and making sure that this entity grows, and at the same time looking at, quote unquote, the world around us is something that we have to be scared of. We have to separate ourselves from entirely. We don't have anything to do with this. And so, quite honestly, what we've done is we've formed these little country clubs, social clubs. Social club is probably a better word, where we're completely locked off from our society and we're not really participating in it any longer. As an example, and I realize this is purely anecdotal, but I can remember growing up. And growing up, what I remember is that you knew the members of the community that were part of your school boards, and all of them were church-going members, all of them. The people that were on your town and city councils, the people that were on your county councils, in many cases were members of were members of the very congregation you went to church with. And now, me being 46, do I know personally anybody in my own generation who's involved really on that level? I know probably one person in a very rural area of the country, but I still do know one, but that's highly unusual. Throughout history, the Christian church, especially in the United States of America, has been highly involved and plugged into its society. And this is what leadership is. It actually means that you have to be engaged. The moment you pull away, the moment you just simply say, well, I don't have anything to do with there, and then if you wake up and you realize, hey, wait, what happened here? The answer is, well, did you really expect everything to continue going in the direction it was going if you weren't going to be involved, if you weren't going to do anything? There actually has to be some level of involvement. Instead of doing this, there has been what I believe is a misinterpretation of what it actually means to be in the world and not of the world. Because to be in the world, as I said before, and not of the world, as Jesus is talking about it, is this understanding that we will have our existence here. We're here and we're supposed to be engaged in it. And we do it understanding that it's not our final place. This is not our home. We're here, but we're present. And as Christians, we've always supposed to have been present in this world, not hiding away from it. We're supposed to understand that we're salt and light. He himself said that you can't, that essentially we're a city on a hill, that we're meant for everybody around us to see. We're not supposed to cover our light up, as he said himself. And so this idea that we're in it but completely not supposed to have anything to do with it, has led to a certain amount of apathy, distancing, and as a result, we wake up one day and we're completely shocked and surprised by the fact that we don't recognize the society that we're surrounded by anymore. And instead of really getting involved, what we end up doing is we end up falling back on these same ideas. And we realize that as the culture has changed, it's now turned around and it's telling Christians how they're supposed to behave. It's no longer a matter of like, oh yeah, I can take examples from the Bible. No, now my culture has radically transformed around me. And then the culture turns around and begins to inform me and all other Christians, well, you're a Christian and this is how you're supposed to behave. And I'd like to kind of address some of the falsehoods surrounding that. So hopefully we can inspire some leadership and some involvement within the Christian community. The first one is a very obvious one, especially in the United States, but this is the idea that as Christians, we're not supposed to be involved, and Christianity isn't supposed to be, touching, any sort of levels of policy in government, because there is a separation of church and state. And this really bothers me when people says, separation of church and state, because it just shows the fact that people have absolutely no understanding about who the founders of the country were and why something like this is important. Because the old world model that the founders of this country were coming from in places all over Europe was a model where there was such a thing as a state church. And so whatever the monarchy in these cases, because it wasn't like there was like a bunch of democracies. I mean, you can go back to the time of, say, Constantine. That was, he's a ruler, but you have a senate and everything else surrounding the Roman people. But here's a great example. He converts to Christianity, and now everybody has to become Christian. This is essentially what it was like to exist in this old world. And so whatever the monarch was, this was now the state religion. Whatever the government dictated the state religion was, people didn't have a choice. The state told you what your religion was. And so if they woke up one day and said, well, it's Roman Catholic, well, you became Roman Catholic whether you wanted to or not. Well, no, you know what? We changed our mind. It's a form of Anglicanism. Okay, I guess I'm Anglican because I don't have any say. The state tells me what my religion is. This is what they were addressing when they were talking about the idea of a separation between church and state, which is why you have the framers of the Declaration of Independence made up of, there was one Catholic, there was a couple of Lutherans, there was all kinds of Congregationalists, there was Presbyterians, there were Episcopalians, there was a number of different groups of people from different denominations, and all of them, for the most part, were very devoted Christians. In fact, one of them was an acting minister at the time. So they didn't really see in any way the idea that you weren't supposed to have anything Christian going on within politics. The very founding of the country happens by a bunch of people who have extremely strong Christian values. And when they're writing about this, when they're dictating out that there is a separation between church and state, at no point in time were they ever saying something along the lines of, as Christians, we're not supposed to be involved in the policies. We're not supposed to be involved in our government. Because if you're not involved in your government, if you're not involved in the policies of your school or of your local town, city, whatever else, what it also means is that you're not involved in the very culture around you. And if we're not influencing the culture around us, then the culture is just going to go wherever it is with no code of morality or anything like that. And then eventually it's going to go wherever it ends up going. And then it's going to turn around and it's going to begin to inform us, the church, as to what good and evil truly are. And it will begin to radically transform the church. And so that's how you actually get something like people like essentially, drag queens telling stories inside of churches in the United States of America. material being shared in churches to children in the United States of America that is highly sexual in nature, in which people are being groomed in church institutions. How does something like that happen? Well, that happens not just by, apathy, but by completely misunderstanding how this stuff actually works. Because if you pull away from the culture is going to just continue to move on. It's going to continue to have this progression, and as it progresses in this way, eventually, at some point in time, it's going to come back and it's going to inform the church. So we, the church, are informing our culture, or it's going to inform us. And we need to understand that in order to take responsibility for that, there has to be a willingness to step in and participate. And in the founders of this country understood this very well. I mean, that's why when you go and you read through a founding document like the Declaration of Independence, you find very Christian ideas that can really only come from the Bible. An idea, for instance, like we believe that all men are created equal and that they are gifted with certain unalienable rights given to them by their Creator. This is not the statement of a group of people who have no Christian morals in mind. And so this idea, this argument, is a poor argument to make. So that brings me to what I think is the next argument that I think culture is telling the church that's actually forcing us as Christians to not really be involved in leadership, to not be involved in our church, in our schools, in our county councils, just being involved in general. And I'm simply saying, the reason I'm saying that's important once again is because this is what I think leadership is. It's actually getting up and being involved. It's being present, even if it doesn't mean running for leadership level, for a leadership position, on a school board. It does mean showing up on a regular basis and saying, hey, I'm here and I don't agree with what you're doing. It could mean organizing a group of people, other parents, where we're saying, hey, we don't agree with what you're teaching our children. It could be organizing a group of people within our communities and showing up and saying, we don't agree with the policies of the city. We have a problem with this. There's nothing wrong with me simply saying, I don't agree. I think what you're doing is evil. So, what's the other thing I think that our culture has now actually done to us is they've spun this back on ourselves and they say, well, Jesus wouldn't do this. When you try to engage in this, they say, well, you're showing hate. And Jesus would never do this. Because you see, Jesus was not a politician. And Jesus was not involved in politics. Now, I'll grant the first point, 100%. If somebody was simply to say to me, and I have had somebody say this to me before, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, that Jesus wasn't a politician. You're right, he wasn't. He was here as the Son of God to do a very specific work, and that was to redeem the world around him. That was to make sure that when I say something like I'm in this world but not of this world, that I'll actually be telling a foundational truth of Christianity. He was trying to make sure that the not of this world was actually a reality. That I had a home prepared for me. I had been redeemed. That all of humanity had been redeemed, and we were not simply damned and left to ourselves. So the idea that he isn't a politician, I agree with this idea 100%, and I don't have any problem with people saying that. The problem I have is when people then say, and he wasn't involved in politics. Because on the surface, it actually looks like they're right. It would look like most people who say, well, Jesus didn't get involved in politics. He was much more concerned with making sure that the diseases of people were taken care of, that the plight of people were taken care of, that they were ministered to in the midst of their hunger, their sickness, their needs, whatever else it might be. And then ultimately the thing he was most concerned with was redeeming the human race. And so he wasn't really worried about politicians. In fact, he was far more worried with the abuses of the religious leaders of the day. And that's absolutely true. But can we say that that means he wasn't involved in politics? And I would say no, because it shows a misunderstanding, or maybe just complete ignorance of what the religious leaders of the day were, who they were, I should say. Because we know when we read through the New Testament that there really is two groups of people that are the religious leaders of the day. You have the Pharisees and you have the Sadducees. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, my argument and my belief is, were extremely political in nature. Especially, definitely the Sadducees, because the Sadducees is a group of people who grew out of the priesthood. They were very well connected with the Hasmonean dynasty, prior to like the Maccabean revolt. They were very involved with the Roman authorities at the time. There was all kinds of connections there. And the ruling authorities, they were important in terms of influence and culture within the society. They were interpreting Torah on a regular basis to the people. They were essentially making sure that people knew exactly how to interpret the law properly. And then once you interpreted that law properly, you could then use it to influence your culture around us. So they were law experts, and so were the Pharisees. Now, let me just hit a pause button on that point. I'll jump back to the Pharisees in a little bit, but I want to kind of just rest here for a little bit on the idea that they were law experts. And I want to just think about our United States government. I want you to think about who's been president. I want us to think about the judges that sit on the Supreme Court. I want us to think about our leaders that are in Senate, in the House of Representatives. I want to think about who these people are. The overwhelming majority of them have law degrees. They are experts in the law and how to, interpret the law and understand the law so that they can use this law to influence the culture around them and to meet the needs of the people that they represent. They are law experts in many ways. I mean, I shouldn't say in many ways. I mean, that's what they are in many cases, I should say. Now, some of them have different, professions, and that's fine. But this is what a politician is in a lot of cases in the United States of America. They're people who know and understand and have studied law, who have studied our Constitution and are interpreting it on a regular basis in order to influence and shape the culture of the people around them. Not really that different. Not really that different at all from what we find amongst the leadership of the Jewish people at the time. Now, the Pharisees were in some ways very similar to the Sadducees because, they were people who had influence also, but their influence was a lot different. Whereas the Sadducees were much more connected with the elite, the Pharisees were much more in contact with the common people. They were actually highly popular amongst the common people, which, we tend to kind of misrepresent now. Because if I go up to a fellow believer and I say to them, hey, you're a Pharisee, they're not going to smile and say, hey, thanks, I love that. That was a great compliment. You're just a wonderful person for calling me a Pharisee, because we see this, as an insult. So to call somebody a Pharisee is in no way meant to be a kind thing. But within the time of Jesus, and you see this very clearly actually in the Sermon on the Mount, when he speaks to the to the people at the Sermon on the Mount, what he says to them is he's speaking to the common people, and he says, if you want to be a good person, your righteousness has to be greater than the Pharisees. He uses the Pharisees not as some type of a negative example, but as a positive example. He's pointing to them. These are people who were highly admired. They were highly respected amongst the common people, especially. They were not seen as like the bad guys of the story. They were well liked within their communities, and they had a lot of pull and they had a lot of power. And so when Jesus is saying to them, you need to be better than the Pharisees, this is to kind of make an example or, show them that they need to understand that what righteousness looks like is actually greater than that of the Pharisees. He can say something like this because the Pharisees were held in high esteem by the common people. And they would battle. There was definitely an ebb and flow, a battle between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, because they didn't agree doctrinally on everything, and so they didn't agree on things like the resurrection. They didn't agree on what exactly belonged to the Holy Scriptures to be used as teaching, and they both had different visions as to how the culture should go. Understand that every time Jesus engaged these groups of people, he was engaging the political leaders of the day. When he was doing things that offended them, when he intentionally did things that offended them, he was offending their interpretation of the law itself. When he would correct them, he was correcting their understanding. And he was not just doing this to a group of people who were, quote unquote, the religious leaders or the temple people or some type of a priesthood. He was actually doing this to a group of people who had the most influence over culture at the time, who were teaching the culture and influencing the culture at the time, and he was deeply involved in this. If we want to take the example of Jesus Christ, he had no issue whatsoever with looking at them and pointing out where they were wrong and simply saying, that's wrong. Don't do this. Don't be like this. Or if you want to be good, you actually have to do better than that. And this made him extremely unpopular. We have this tendency to believe that the only reason that Jesus was killed is because he made the claim that he was the Son of God. But that's not just simply the case. In fact, what we read within the Scripture is there was this power dynamic that they were seeing, and they were seeing these large crowds of people going out after him. In fact, a great example of this is found when, after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. This happens not that far from Jerusalem, and it's a very short period of time later that he's in Jerusalem. And as he enters into Jerusalem during this time, after news of this resurrection of Lazarus and all the other miracles has happened, a large throng of people go out to meet him, and they're praising him, and they're crying out their hosannas to him. And we have this side note where it says that the Pharisees are on the outside looking in and pointing out the fact that, look, the whole world's gone after him now. What are we going to do? The entire world's has gone after him. And so what they do is, from that point in time on, they conspire to kill him. We need to get rid of him because they see him as a threat to their power. It wasn't just a matter of religion, it was about power for them too. Now, Jesus wasn't after the power. He was just simply after the hearts of people. I understand this. And I think even when I ask people to become involved, even when I say that leadership actually looks like becoming involved, caring about it enough to actually get off our butts and do something, we also have to understand that even as we do this, we don't do it from a place of trying to do damage to other people. Paul himself is very clear about the fact that in this world, we don't battle against flesh and blood. In other words, what he's trying to tell us, or what he is telling us, is that human beings are not our enemy. It's principalities and powers of darkness in high places. And do they want to have influence over the culture? You bet they want influence over the culture. They want to transform it and do it radically. And if we step into these places and we begin to inform the culture around us that, that's wrong. That's evil. I'm going to put my finger on it. Is it going to be something that's rewarded? No, it's not going to be rewarded, with a lot of praise and adulation. But I would make the argument that we're called to do it. That we are salt and light in the world. And in order to be salt and light, we actually have to be active. We have to be present. Otherwise, we're simply salt that has lost its savor. And Jesus is very clear about what happens when that's the case. When that's the case, the salt has become absolutely useless because it's not willing to do what it's supposed to do. And we're supposed to also understand that if we're going to be light in the world around us, then the same thing applies to us that applied to Jesus. After the dialogue with Nicodemus, John makes this statement about Jesus, that he is the light that has come into the world. And people have rejected him. And the reason people reject him is because men love darkness rather than light, because they do not want to step into the light, because if they do, their deeds will be exposed as evil. It's not about making sure that people like us. And I think that's the other thing that we have been informed of by our culture as Christians at this point in time. We have to make sure people like us. We want to be one of the popular people, so we don't want to offend others. It's our job to basically be as nice as we possibly can be. That's what real leadership within the Christian church looks like. You know what? If that's really what was going on, is people were just being nice as they could possibly be, and being as popular as they could possibly be, then why did the overwhelming majority of the earliest of them end up persecuted, dead, put in prison, beaten? It's because they were not being informed of their culture. They were willing to inform their culture. They were not passive followers. They were not apathetic and on the sidelines. They were highly engaged. They were informing the culture around them. And they were going to battle, not against flesh and blood. Not against flesh and blood. Because that's not what our battle is against, but against principalities and powers of darkness that are trying to influence the culture every single day and the people that are involved in the culture. And if we're not willing to step into our role, they are going to continue to transform it. We're going to wake up 20 years from now and we're going to say, could you imagine what it would have been, what we would have said if this is what it was like 20 years ago? We're just going to sit on the sidelines and just be shocked that it happened while we did nothing? Or we could just simply say, no, enough. Not enough in the sense of like, enough, I'm going to do violence. No, enough. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to participate. I'm going to show up. I'm going to defend the people that can't defend themselves. I'm going to be present in my society on a regular basis, because this is what I believe it means to be Christian. To have the courage to point out evil for what it is, to have the courage to show love and compassion when people say to not show love and compassion, to have the ability to truly represent what it means to be Christian, even when that might be extremely unpopular, not just with the culture, but with the Christian church at large. A Christian church at large that wants us to keep the peace, be quiet, don't say anything that might offend people. We don't want people to think we're not nice. That's not what leadership is. To be a leader means we can't be informed by what's popular. We can't, even if it's coming from within the church itself. We can't be informed by our culture. We can't be just simply completely inundated and influenced. We have to become the influencers, and that has to be guided by the very Spirit of God. This is what it actually means to be Christian. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I can't wait to talk to you again. Thanks for joining me. I don't take it lightly that you spent part of your day here, and I hope that this gave you something that you can carry with you through the rest of the day. If this connected with you in any way, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. This is the easiest way that you can help me continue to grow the show so that more people can continue to join the conversation. Until next time, I'll see you later.